Okay, let's talk about metabolism. The traditional way of trying to do this, there's people making billions with a B on diets and programs and plant extracts and all kinds of things in this country. Calorie restriction decreases metabolic rate and enhances hunger and reduces the drive to move. This is just a metabolic thing. And this is encoded in our ancient genetic code, because if you aren't needing to use energy and you need to run like heck to catch your food or to escape a predator, you don't need to waste energy when you're not. So your metabolism will respond to your level of activity and begin to regulate itself. So we're made to do that, and it's really a bad strategy to diet and even to diet and add too much exercise. Much better to diet and sleep more, but then to add moderate exercise, but not huge amounts of exercise. And also, short bursts of vigorous exercise we're now finding is probably better, especially for those of us over 50, where our joints can't take the constant, long distance stuff. Better to do vigorous exercise briefly and then do intervals for a little bit. Much better for our cardiac and our health than to long, slow distance or something like that. Macronutrients, basically, we have different thermogenesis, so all carbohydrates are not created equal. You can eat pretty much as much raw vegetable and fruit material as you can stuff in yourself. Actually, celery is a negative calorie burn to what you get out of it, and it's got a lot of good fiber in it. So you can actually eat almost as much as you want to eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, like 10, 12 servings a day sometimes, and it just feels really good. And also the way we burn energy. Our metabolism is greatly affected by how much fat we eat. We're learning to coach people with blood sugar and insulin resistance, diabetes or metabolic syndrome, into eating more fat, healthy fats, and less the carbohydrates, because the carbohydrates just set up this bipolar, insane metabolism. And actually, there's people now, some of the morbidly obese people that are way over 400 pounds can be restricted down to 400 calories a day. That's less than one decent meal, and they're still gaining weight because their metabolism is that tuned in to down-regulating itself to allow them to maintain. That's the way we're made, because we're in the ancient, the way our epigenetic code was, instead we had feast or famine. So in the fall, you might eat like a king. When all the stuff comes in, all the fruit ripens and all of that, and then through the winter you needed to make it through. So you wanted to pack on the pounds. So the metabolic is very attuned to that. So you eat a lot of sugar, it'll turn it into fat. If you eat less sugar and eat more fats, the fats go slow burn, and you burn fat when you eat fat. And these are all things that we're now learning. The non-fat thing almost killed me, because I'd eat half a gallon of ice cream that was non-fat. I thought, man, this is good. I can eat, that's not so good anymore. I'll eat frozen yogurt. That's really good for you. Full of sugar, just massive amounts of sugar. Then I'd pass out in an insulin coma, and then I'd wake up at 2 a.m. Feeling completely hungover. And that was the pattern that I had for a long time. Also, if you eat these macronutrients, you get satiation much different. I'll talk about that in a minute. Quality of calories much more than quantity of calories. As I said, you can eat almost as much of the plant material as you can. The biologic endpoint is to reduce insulin levels, because insulin is how our bodies take the sugars and the nutrients and convert them into energy. And if you need an insulin response to do that in the cells, and if they're down-regulated or unregulated because of too much sugar. I'll say more about that in the microbiome section. So international data, this is more things, more statistics, but we have trends. Here's obesity and diabetes, the twin epidemics. 1890, 1 in 30 adults are obese. In 2000, 1 in 3 adults are obese. That's huge increase.
That's
1 in 30.
In the United States, right? That's here.
Yeah, I think yes. Yeah. I'm not sure about this one. Yeah, I think that's true. And diabetes per 100,000 population, 1 in 50,000. adults are diabetic. That was obesity, and the other one's now diabetes, and that was about 1930, 5 or 38, and now 1 in 9 adults are diabetic. 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 9. More statistics. 1 in 6 children are considered obese. 1 in 3 adolescents 6-9 are overweight or obese, and adults it's getting worse and worse. Obesity occurs when a person consumes more calories than she burns is the going mythology about weight gain. And overweight's a result of caloric imbalance. Too few calories expended for the amount of calories consumed. It is mediated by genetics and health. This is actually from our Surgeon General in 2008. And so you get this thing. You're eating nothing and exercising to exhaustion and still gaining weight. Here is food consumption. Carbohydrates have gone up. Fat has gone down a little bit. And proteins from 71 to 2,000. And then obesity rates, look at the obesity rates of 20 to 74-year-olds, 12 to 19-year-olds, and finally at the top line is 20 to 74-year-olds. Obesity and overweight. Different foods produce different thermic effects. So have you ever had a tank of bad fuel in your car? It didn't burn good. This is sort of like that. Sugar is like rocket fuel in your metabolism, and you really don't need that grade of fuel to get energy, because you'll get a spike and you'll have this rocket ship and then you crash again. So, and it has then it affects our hormonal expression, and our epigenetic response is affected by hormones and stress and different things. And the biggest effect, the biggest research now is coming with the microbiome, with the bacteria that live in us and on us. Actually, they're not necessarily in us, because the digestive system is not in the body, right? It's not in your body till it's in the bloodstream, really. But they live in the digestive tract. So this is just some stats you can look at in your thing. Sugar and sucrose and fructose and high corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, and fructose is in honey and fruit. But as long as you eat it in the whole form, you're probably fine, because you get the balancing of the fiber. If you drink your fruit as in juice, really, really not good. It's almost pure sugar. My dentist that I am really close with, that I go to every 6 months and talk about flossing or not flossing. But my dental hygienist is talking about that they have Pittsfield, Massachusetts doesn't fluoridate their water, and they're having little kids that they're having to pull their baby teeth out because they're rotted completely down to the roots from just mouth disease from not being able to take care of the amount of sugar in their diets. Interestingly, there's a thing you should maybe just know about is a little bit about carbohydrate density. So you can talk about how quickly the body recognizes the food as sugar and how quickly it converts. I see diabetic friends of mine eating rice cakes all the time. It's the worst, the highest glycemic food there is. It almost immediately turns into sugar. So, because it's very simple breakdown. This is in. If you can probably Google this if you can't see the size of the slide. May be hard to see. We've seen some slides this morning about brains on drugs. This is brains on lean and obese people. Same dopamine receptor downregulation in people with obesity.
What are the best carbohydrates?
What's that?
As opposed to rice cakes, what are the best carbohydrates?
I think like a chicken has no carbohydrates in it, especially breast meat and that sort of thing. Yeah. There's some resources that I'll cover later on in the presentation that will help you address that. Leptin. Leptin is signals satiation in the brain, in the hypothalamus, and signals that makes you kind of ready to move. And leptin resistance includes in weight gain, and it's hard to control the hunger. And then it leads to inflammation with insulin resistance, and then insulin resistance associated with leptin resistance.
Amino acid, or is that a hormone?
Leptin, I'm not sure. I should know this, but a lot of this is really complex stuff I'm trying to get my brain around. I think it's like I think it's released in the nervous system, so it's probably more like a transmitter or thing, or it could be hormonal. Fructose induces insulin resistance, which induces leptin resistance. So how does this make sense? So as I already sort of mentioned, people in the fall of the year would have pretty much unlimited access to fruits that are falling off the trees because they're just burden, and they would gorge themselves in this stuff, and they'd become insulin resistant and gain a bunch of weight to save their lives through the long, lean winter. And so that's what the microbiome, or that's partly the microbiome, but that's partly the genetic coding that we're stuck with. So now we have unlimited access to sugar. I had a friend from Africa as a physician. We went into a jumbo Stop and Shop, and his mind was completely blown. He could not take this in because there was enough food in this place in the produce section alone to feed his village for 2 years. And he just couldn't fathom it. That this is this is one of 3 stores in a block in that shopping area. And he just couldn't fathom it. And we had a bit of conversation. He didn't even have words for what he witnessed in there. He was like, just seeing the produce section in the super Stop and Shop. We had a pizza for lunch because he came and talked to us about addiction treatment in his country in Africa. And we had a sheet pizza about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide for 12 people. He ate a little square like this, and he was a very lean man, but he couldn't fathom that we were eating pizza like that for lunch, no less, when we had to go back to work again. So, but this is the way we're coded. If you have juice unopposed by fiber, it's really bad because you get an insulin. Charge of insulin in the body, and then the body will try to normalize that and downregulate, and then you become insulin resistant. So the idea is to keep the insulin low and the cells responsive to that. Okay, let's talk about, this is even more fascinating, microbiome. So this has evolved with us. The microbiome is the bacteria in us and on us, has evolved with humans to allow us to survive. They do important functions in digestion, immunity, a huge part of our immune system. They recognize bad molecules coming into the body and attack them. They protect in the gut, in the mucus in the gut is a major part of our immune system to protect us. Immunity, we have bacteria in our mouths that recognize strangers that aren't wanted, and it kills them right in the mouth. Increased diversity is seen with decreased hygiene, and increased diversity is good. So they're saying that we've gotten too sterile, and that's why we have a big spike in problems with allergies and food, all different kinds of things. We have too sterile of an environment. If a baby is cesarean section and doesn't get nursed, they miss out on a huge amount of their immune things. I liked the bumper sticker once I saw. Breastfeeding is the first step in affordable health care because it builds such a good immune system. I don't mean to lay this on anybody because there's good reasons for cesarean sections. But truly, we've become a little bit too focused on germs, and actually germs can be good. They're encouraging us now in this healthy living to actually shake hands with 10 people before we eat our meal and not wash our hands to get more diverse microbiome. I'm still struggling with that one, especially if they have sweaty hands. I just can't. But also, it's good if you... I do this now because I sort of always did this 5-second rule. If I drop food, I'm likely to eat it still. If it's a piece of really good food, I might blow it off or something like that, like you do with the 4th child with their pacifier or something like that. The first one you boil it, the second one, by the 5th child you say, "Get it yourself, you little bastard." Okay, increased, the diversity is good in the microbiome. Getting dirty may be good for you. Increased carbohydrate digesting microbiome is in populations with increased carbohydrate intake. So we change our microbiome when we eat a lot of sugar. Reduced diversity is seen in obesity. This is the problem, not the inability of having willpower or trying to control yourself. These are little buggers. There's trillions of them in there, and they will not let you lose weight if they get in a certain out of sync. Diet's a powerful factor that can shift the microbiome. So if you change your diet, it will begin to shift back. This is mind-bending. From a cellular perspective, our body is 10% human genetically now, 10% human, and 90% microbial. You have 90% of your cells in your body are not human. The gut microbiome in each person contains 100 to 150 times as many genes as a human gene pool. 99% of the genetic diversity in our body is due to microbial colonization. I was even wrong. This is the amount of cells, and now we're getting down to the genetics. So, germ-free mice and mice with the richest flora in their intestines are the leanest. So you have a germ-free mouse, good. They don't have any bad bacteria, so they are lean. And then mice with many diverse microbes in their intestine. They can look at little mice's intestines. It's hard to do that with humans until we're dead. So, but the immune system is a huge part of our microbiome, and there's a lot of psychological stuff happens in our nervous system as a result of bacteria in our gut. I can't get into this because it's a pretty deep subject, and we don't have time for it today, but you can look at that. This slide is in there for you to try to do that. There's a couple of articles there, psychobiotics. GI flora affect metabolic syndrome in humans. This is going to get a little bit weird here, but this is what I said. I'm going to bend your minds a little bit. What they're doing now to try and help people that's really the most successful is they're transplanting fecal material from one healthy person into a non-healthy person. There's some significant help that's occurring to people with GI problems like Crohn's disease and other things by transplanting fecal material from a healthy person that has a more diverse bacteria structure into people. One guy that I read about in the New Yorker, he had ear infections his whole entire life in one ear. He just couldn't get rid of them, and he had antibiotics after antibiotics after antibiotics. He had an ear infection his entire childhood and adolescence. Finally, at one point, he reached in his good ear and he got a piece of wax out of there. He wasn't intending to do this, and it looked kind of weird, so he had he pressed it on his fingers, and then he touched his good ear, and he somehow transplanted some wax from his good ear to his bad ear, and he never had another ear infection after that. Somehow the bacteria in the good ear took care of the ear infections in the bad ear. So we can change these little bugs in us, and so they're doing now fecal transplants much more successful than medicines in terms of helping people restore health to their intestines. And another thing that's kind of mind-bending, they know now that even artificial sweeteners can affect it, because you get a certain charge out of the brain when it tastes sweetness that prepares the body, and you actually get some insulin release into the bloodstream with an artificial sweetener, which then prepares and begins to change the microbiome in a way that they go higher and higher in the ileum. And the next thing, they're sitting right under the stomach, ready to grab the carbohydrates that come in, and they're bad guys. They grab onto the carbohydrates, immediately metabolize them, and turn that into fat, because they're thinking that they're not going to get enough. So they just keep going, and eventually you have such less diversity in your that there's no way you're going to lose weight without getting that changed around. So we need to really help people to do that and not just shame them more. Another thing with oils, they have warned us off of animal fats and that sort of thing. Apparently now we're getting back to that pasture-fed animals that aren't given antibiotics and that aren't fattened up in feedlots and other places, actually their fats are probably healthy for us, especially in the terms of the microbiome. In fact, when they substituted polyunsaturated vegetable oils for saturated fats, increased cardiovascular risks and deaths from all causes. And we've been we really made a mistake as a culture when we went from lard to Crisco, and everybody had Crisco. But in the context of that post-World War II thing, it made sense because women were enslaved in terms of food preparation and gathering and all of that, and it gave them a chance to have some freedom and some leisure in their lives. So it made absolute sense to eat out of a box and have prepared things, Velveeta cheese, and some of these things that are still around. But really not healthy for our microbiome. And okay, less saturated fat, more heart disease. More saturated fat, less heart disease. This is fairly new stuff. We need to. Well, it's late 90s in that case. Atkins had it right mostly. There's some modified Atkins now that you can eat more fat as long as it's healthy fats and that sort of thing. And I'm amazed how effective that is. That my metabolism is steady when I eat a significant amount of fat and almost no simple carbs. So eat away. The quality of calories trumps the quantity of calories. I've said enough about this with carbs. Whole grains are much better than refined grains, but there's some questioning of whole grains, and some people are getting people are getting too carried away with some of the gluten stuff maybe, but it certainly is a big concern. This slide in there, some of the oils that were said were really, really bad, but really good oils are medium chain triglycerides. They reduce the leaky intestine syndrome, which really affects your immune system and inflammation. All right, I want to move then into inflammation. I'm going to get through this. If we end early, that's good, or if you have questions, we can discuss stuff and do a little bit more. Inflammation. This is something that a lot of people have been working on for a lot, and it's really tied to a lot of very, very big problems, including some of the chronic things and some of the things that we're seeing a spike in with autism spectrum, with attention deficit, and some of these things are going up rapidly. And we think that there's related things to lifestyle in that we can get a lot of good out of this. I think there's a book for sale here about ADHD that is probably not liking the amount of amphetamines that were given to kids and stuff like that. Inflammation is tied to almost everything: stroke, cardiac disease, atherosclerosis, and even periodontitis, mouth gingivitis can cause a cascade of events in the body to increase inflammation. They test that with C-reactive protein test, and your doctor can do that. It's a blood test that they can tell how much inflammation you have. We do that now in our health life enhancement program. So you have poor quality carbs leads to excess insulin in the bloodstream. More fat storage, that's exactly what insulin is helping us to do. Downregulation of insulin receptors, more insulin resistance, more eating because you crave more. Then you get leptin resistance, eat more, do less. That's kind of the physiological response to that. And then the sleep disruption, social isolation, hormonal imbalances, all those things, toxic exposures, all relate to that. We now see inflammation tied to all these chronic diseases. Inflammation and cancer survival. If you have low C-reactive protein, the life trajectory is much longer than if you have high C-reactive protein, the amount of inflammation in your body. Sugar, refined grains, fructose, I've said a lot about that. Sometimes the omega oils, we're getting too much O6 and not enough O3. O3 is the best one, O6, and sometimes if you get a cheaper supplement, sometimes they'll have more O6 but not as much O3, so you want to be pretty careful about which ones those are. There's a lot of good information out there. I'll give you some websites for that. Food sensitivities, gluten, grains, and dairy. Some people have that. We have a lot of environmental toxins that we get, including from plastic. I don't use plastic anymore at work. I have a stainless steel bottle, but I still drink out of the plastic when I'm in places like this. So we want a more diverse microbiome, so more vegetables and plant-based fiber, more healthy unsaturated and monounsaturated and omega-3 fats. High glycemic charge carbs. If you eat French fries and different kinds of grain-produced manufactured foods, especially seed grains, wheat, and some of those. Oats is better, but some of them, 62 genes regulating inflammation are turned on. And if you eat low glycemic carbs, those are turned off. So it's quite amazing, and I've been amazed at just how much that lifestyle does make a difference. I'm not going to talk about celiac because I don't know enough about it, except that I've been amazed. We have a good friend of mine in our town has celiac. She was almost starving to death when she was nursing her children, and and they didn't know, and finally she found out, and it saved her life. But she's actually a short stature and very small woman based on the celiac that she didn't know she had until she was pregnant with her second child, and then has since really gotten that taken care of. Made a lot of difference for her. So and we want to be careful about some of these things. I barely understand this. Again, I'm not a scientist or a physician, but I try to translate some of this. But I do know that intestinal permeability is not a good thing, because what happens is you get a lot of molecules out of your small intestine. There's some nasty bugs in there. And if they get down into your abdomen, outside of your small intestine, they set off an immune response that causes inflammation. And so that's a really bad thing. So you want a healthy microbiome and a healthy mucus layer, which comes mostly from fermentation of plant materials. So, and you can do that without doing a lot of, although you can do a diet where you try to kind of rule out different foods, which is a good thing to do one at a time, kind of see what your response is. It's probably not a good idea necessarily to start flushing yourself like some people with eating disorders where they use a lot of laxatives and stuff like that. So there's a lot of products for a lot of money on the market. Be careful if you just gradually change your food diet. That's usually the best for most people. This is an illustration from the slide about a nice mucus layer and healthy fibers release butyrate, and that lets down into immunoinflammatory inhibitors. If you don't have the good microbes and mucus in there, it gets through in the small intestine. You only have one layer of cells in there, and it leaks down into your abdomen, and that sets off inflammation and illness. Stress, just a little bit more about fight, flight, freeze. I've kind of covered that. I just wanted to mention also people who've had trauma. This is really a very important thing that we need to keep in mind as we be trauma-informed and trying to help people. But if you have a person with a lot of trauma triggers, and they get triggered into these fight, flight, freezes, and their bodies stay in that state, because there's so many triggers for some trauma survivors that just smells and sights, and it becomes unconscious, as was illustrated this morning by Dr. Simpson. He was just at the base of the bridge, and he had this physiological reaction to that. We need to really work with them on trying to help them. One of the things that I'm going to do with you toward the end here is a couple of breathing exercises that I teach all my clients now, and my friends and my children and everybody, because it's really helping them to have a tool that they can use other than being freaked out constantly. So, but the biggest thing is we want to get our bodies back to level status as quickly as possible after a trigger. And if you go much past 3 hours, it's hard to get that out of your body again. And if you go days and begin to lack sleep because of it, it's not impossible. We had one man come in a manic episode, came into the hospital. He's very psychotic from the mania. It took us 3 weeks of 25 milligrams of Ativan a day to get his brain calmed down again, because he had so much stress and hormones and that in his body. And if we didn't give him the antipsychotic, well, it was an antipsychotic medication triggered as well. If we didn't give him the antipsychotic, he was suicidal and would have died from suicide. If we gave him if we give him the antibiotic, it causes neuroleptic malignant syndrome, and we had to get his brain back to, but we couldn't keep him on the antipsychotic medicine, so we had to take him off of that, but it took 3 weeks. He begged us to let him die. He begged us. He was so cranked up. He was strapped to the bed, because that's the only way we could contain him, and he would walk the bed across the room with just his body movement. He was that cranked and that vigorous with over energy. And so the big thing is to restore sleep, and when your body is hijacked with that, and then you add substances into that, and the substances work at first because they calm that down, and they really work, and that becomes so reinforcing that it gets down. Dr. Simpson talked about the pleasure turns into relief. And I have a slide that I use in teaching patients, and I've worked a long time on it. I've been in addiction work for 30 years. And I talk about that when you have a pleasure response to substance use, that's in the mammal brain. And that's very rewarding, and it becomes unconscious and hard to control. Once you get physical dependence and you get a blood level that's too low of a substance, then you get withdrawal, and that becomes relief use. And that's I think that's in the reptile brain, in the survival brain. And that's when people become robotic. They say that I don't want to do this anymore, and they swear every day they're not going to do it, and then they find themselves desperately needing to do it, as if they need to do it to survive. And that's they're driven into a craving that is not conscious anymore. And then we have a lot of stress in our lives. When Wall Street crashed and people lost a lot of money, there were suicides as a result of that. This isn't life-threatening to lose money. May all our problems be financial. However, it's very stressful to lose a lot of money, and people start to beat on themselves and get really out of sync, and that can cause that. This guy standing at the side of his car in a traffic jam that needs to get to somewhere, this is really, really stressful. So our bodies can't tell the difference between that triggered stress and an actual life-threatening thing. So we get adrenalized and full of cortisol, and that's very hard to overcome. So how do we get more calm? Let's move into a little bit of this. Proactive stress management. We really are encouraging now. One of the best things we can do is conscious breathing, mindfulness, meditation. Gratitude is a really good principle to remember things that we have. That's one of the resiliency models, is to talk about the good things in their life. Think about those, maybe list them out. The sympathetic nervous system is our stimulatory crank up, and the parasympathetic is our calming thing. Yogis that breathe really, really well and have good meditation techniques, you can actually see variation in their heart rate and that sort of thing. And it happens sort of to all of us, but really gets accomplished with yogis. When they are exhaling, their sympathetic tone goes up in their bodies. When they inhale, it goes down a little bit. The sympathetic goes up and the parasympathetic goes down. You got this kind of seesaw. And actually, that's why most meditative breathing techniques exhale longer than they inhale, to take advantage of loading up the parasympathetic nervous system. This is all in the vagus nerve, and wonderful, wonderful stuff. Very, very interesting. And that. So one of the things you can do is just breathe. I tell smokers when I'm working with them on, if they're choosing to be in tobacco treatment, the one thing smokers do really, really good is they breathe. They breathe consciously more than anybody else, maybe 200 times a day. And I say women that have had babies know how to do this, and people that smoke weed know how to do this. Breathe deep and slow. And this is a little bit of humor to help them, but this is actually true. I believe that. And I had one woman who was intending to quit smoking about 6 months out. And so we were working on it, and I wasn't pushing it. We were doing motivational interviewing and talking about this. And I said to her, based on this, how smokers breathe effectively, I said, before you smoke cigarettes, she smoked about a half a pack a day now. And she did it outside exclusively. She didn't smoke during her work day. So I said, when you go out to smoke a cigarette, take 2 minutes, the time that you would normally take to smoke the cigarette, and breathe first. And I gave her some breathing exercises. And then if you still want to smoke a cigarette, go ahead. She was shocked because she quit in a week because she found that she felt some response from the deep breathing and she didn't have to smoke anymore. And it gradually cleared out. And she was smoking 1 cigarette a day. And then she says, this is crazy. I don't want to buy them and have them last for 2 weeks. So I'm just going to quit. And that was amazing to her. It was just it sneaked up on her that way. Environmental toxins, I'm not going to go through this in depth because I don't have a lot of time, but I included this so you can see there's a lot of chemicals in our environment. They're being manufactured in large quantities, tons and tons and tons of stuff. In the average newborn right now, there's 280 non-indigenous chemicals in their bodies at birth. So these are being instilled already, traces of these chemicals in their bodies. And mothers are usually pretty careful about their diet and that sort of thing during pregnancy. And yet these babies, even to born very, very healthy babies, have 280 traces of chemicals in their bodies. It affects our nervous system, immune system, our reproductive thing, joints, skin problems. I've always had pretty dry skin. Since I eat a more balanced diet, my skin is better. I've been amazed at that. It's still dry, but not nearly as what it was. Links to toxic exposure are really run the gamut and especially affect our mitochondria, those little manufacturing things that turn food into energy in our cells. And then I wanted to say one more thing about pharmaceuticals. Don't flush your medicines down the toilet. Please don't flush your medicines down the toilet. We have opioids now and other things. Even when they're gone through the body, there's still a lot of traces of these drugs get in our sewage systems and then back into our water supply. But it's quite amazing. They're finding it now in fish and all kinds of things, pharmaceuticals, many, many things that you can see in this map around the country, places that have measurable toxicity of pharmaceutical, not toxicity, but they have lead, not to mention the lead, as we've found in Flint, Michigan, other places. And the plastics are really disastrous. You can go to any Pacific island, uninhabited island, little atolls, reefs in the Pacific. There's plastic on all these little islands that there's never been. There's a plastic flotsam in the Pacific that's the size of Texas. All the ships in the world couldn't haul that away. And that's what we got going on out there in our oceans. This gets broken up by the surf and it gets into micro things, and the little feeder fish and little microbes eat that. And some of them break it down. Actually, there's some good bacteria that break that down, but it gets in the food supply and keeps recycling itself. Same with antibiotics in the foods. They feed antibiotics to animals to make them get fat. It makes their guts leaky, and they gain weight. Well, it's good if you're only going to live a year to get fat quickly and be put to market. But for those of us that want to live long, it's a bad thing to have a leaky intestine. In cosmetics products, a woman uses an average of 12 products containing 168 different ingredients. Some of these are toxic in larger quantities. Even I just was looking at my lip balm. It's got some benzene in it. It's a sunscreen, not so good stuff anymore. So I got to get rid of but there's some things coming up. Here's some more. But here's some free apps that I wanted you guys to have. One of the best is Environmental Working Group. If you Google Environmental Working Group, they have a ton of resources there on foods, including like a dirty dozen of foods, pesticides in foods, and what you can buy non-organic or organic. So it's really kind of important to buy certain apples and celery and strawberries, that sort of thing, organic, but you can buy the non-organic because they don't have pesticides in on some of the other foods. All right? So you'll see some of that. We got just 5 minutes, so I need to move through this. Yes?
Have you seen any research on, these changed eating behaviors on thyroid conditions?
I don't know the depths of it, but yes, it does have effects on a lot of different hormonal things in the body. Balanced health is what we are trying to go for. It really doesn't matter where you start as long as you make small change. In fact, we found in health education with wellness programs, it's much better to have a person give up cream in their coffee rather than try 15 different things. And one woman did that. In a year, she lost 20 pounds. That's the only change she made. And that's quite amazing. One guy was kind of lonely, so he got a dog. He lost 30 pounds in a year because the dog had to go outside. And life-saving. A little bit on friendship. So which L do you need? Lipitor, liposuction, or love? I mentioned the mammal, the reptilian, paleo-mammalian, and the neo-mammalian, the primate brain. This is really incredible stuff that we're learning a lot from animal models and from humans, especially from primates themselves. We're finding out how really, truly important it is. And so all animals seek this stuff out. And baby mammals have a separation communication with their caretakers. That's how important this bonding is. They all respond to cuddling, holding, and adults do as well. Oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins are released with contact and with care, and even a conversation with somebody that you care about. My friend has a picture of his son on his phone. When he gets stressed out at work, he's a physician. He looks at his son, and he's measured his pulse being calmed down. He can. That's a fix for him. And then play. I can't emphasize enough. Play is really involved in social learning, but play is when we're our best selves because we're completely unconscious of hierarchy and all of that default brain network stuff, and we're really bonded. So chest pounding is out, grooming is in. There's a group of baboons in a place in Africa where the big male that was in head of that troop died from tuberculosis, actually, that got into that troop of baboons. And they've studied them. Robert Sapolsky from Stanford studies primates like that. And that baboon troop has gone 2 generations now of new babies born without an aggressive male coming back in. They do blood work on them, and their stress levels are way down from the surrounding baboon troops, just from having a non-aggressive bullying male in the troop. Empathy is essential in healing. Forgiveness important. Other strategies just for your follow-up. Food habits, sugar, I've already mentioned that to death here. Highly processed foods, diet, low-fat foods, not probably good for you. If I drink milk, I don't drink much cow's milk, but if I drink whole milk now, which I don't care for because I'm so attuned to skim milk, but skim milk's not so good. It's got some added stuff, especially sugars, gluten, grains, trans fats, artificial sweeteners. Anti-inflammatory, I've already said that. Here's your environmental working group website with the Dirty Dozen and the 15 lowest, clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. Anti-inflammatory lifestyle includes connection, sleep I've already mentioned. Circadian rhythms are really important. It takes about 3 weeks to reset your circadian rhythms, and then you should be tuned in. I wake up the same time no matter what time I go to bed, and I always wake up right before the alarm clock goes off. It's like magic. Movement is every step counts. Activity and motion. They did exercise training in 120 older adults, a year of stretching versus aerobic exercise. The aerobic group at 6 months in a year had increased hippocampal volume. That's our memory system in our brain. Meditation works. Mindfulness. I wanted to do a quick, here's Thomas Edison from many years ago. The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest your patients in a proper diet and prevention of disease. Okay, here's the slide. I want to do this with you, at least the first one. So Andrew Weil, the great yoga teacher in California, now he does a thing on his website, Andrew Weil, that has breathing techniques. So the first one I use now regularly. I use it every day, at least 3 or 4 times, and I use it when I can't sleep at night. 4, 7, 8. 4 inhale, 7 hold, 8 exhale. So it goes, yoga breathing is usually through your nose, so you can just put your tongue up behind your teeth and breathe in. So Do that 4 cycles, and do that a few times a day. It feels a little obnoxious at first. You want to breathe in through your nose. You hold. I usually like to close my lips at that point because I'm not restrained enough to not breathe out at that point. And then I breathe out with the pursed lips, like. And you want to do it steadily, so you have a steady breath. That count of 8. Really amazing. After a couple months, your blood pressure will be lower, your pulse will be lower, you'll have better sleep, you'll have better metabolism, digestion. This is what he says, and he's designed this yoga breathing. Another one I really like after I've done the 4-7-8 is a relaxing meditative breath. I used to try to imagine myself going to places and being in calm, good states. When I meditated, now I just focus on my breath. Much more effective to get back in the body and just do that rhythm. And it distracts your mind from all the busy work. We have a default brain network, which is, they did a, if you bear with me for just a minute, they did a quick study, not a quick study, this is a quick explanation. They did a study at some of the MIT, I think was one of them. They thought that the brain would be most active when they're focused on solving a deep problem like physics problem. And so they hooked up brain testing to genius physics math majors, and they gave them really complicated physics problems with a reward if they solved it, and they'd focus in and their brains calmed down. Their brains got really quiet and focused on the work. And then when they stopped working on a focused problem, their brains went completely wild again. That's where you think about everything. We did this in our psych unit. We wrote down all our thoughts in a minute period. It was quite amazing. Most of us had over 120 different things in a minute period. You know, our children and our work and something we're worried about and our finances and this and that. We just flip around. That's the brain. So there's 3 main things that we do when we're daydreaming or not focused on thinking about something. We think about the past because the past is really important, not for memory, but for constructing a future. So when you're driving to the Cape, you think about the last time you came to the Cape. Should you take the Bourne or the Sagamore? And you're mapping out the future by thinking about the past. They actually have done this in rat studies, seeing how they're thinking by giving them mazes, problems to solve. And then going back, so you think about the past, the future, and then you think about the social network, how you fall in the social network. You think about your boss that yelled at you. You think about what you're going to say to your wife who's mad at you, or your husband. You think about what you're going to talk to your children about because they're doing something that's worrisome to you, or you're happy about something. And this is what we do when we're solving problems. I drive an hour a day each way to work. I'm always solving all these problems. And so I have to calm. So I do the meditative breathing sometimes on the way to work. And then ocean breath, this is a constriction of your throat. It's also called Darth Vader breath. This one helps me because I picture the surf when I'm doing this. So this goes like... It's a Darth Vader. It's a little weird, but it really helps me. If I can then picture the surf and I do that breathing, it is calming. And your parasympathetic nervous system will respond to that. I was going to tell you a joke, but let me think of that. Oh, one yoga story, and then I'll let you out of here. This farmer he was a poor farmer in a country. He had no horses, and so he couldn't farm his fields with the horses, so he had very small plots. One day, he finally saved up 3 years. He got a horse, and he started plowing his field. The neighbors all said, "Man, this is so great. You got a horse now. You can really farm and feed your family well." He said, "Good news, bad news, who knows?" About a week later, his horse ran away. The neighbors all said, "Man, this is terrible. You don't have a horse now." He ran away. The farmer says, "Good news, bad news, who knows?" And about a few days later, the horse came back with another horse. So the neighbor says, "Man, this is great. You got 2 horses. Now your son can help you in the field." Farmer says, "Good news, bad news, who knows?" About a few days later, the son wasn't plowing the fields. He was riding the new horse without permission, got bucked off, broke his leg. Neighbor says, "Man, this is terrible. Now you only have one person working in the field again, and the second horse is going to go to waste." The farmer says, "Good news, bad news, who knows?" A few days later, the war broke out in the kingdom. All the young men got conscripted into the army, And the son had a broken leg. He didn't get conscripted. The neighbor says, this is really good news. Your son doesn't have to go fight as a soldier. Farmer says, good news, bad news, who knows? So if you kind of look at that, sometimes the biggest challenges in our lives turn out to be the biggest blessings. That's certainly been true for me. Namaste.
Namaste.